Morning, good afternoon, and maybe even for some of you, good evening. My name is John Hoekstra. Thanks for joining us today in Driving Decarbonization and talking a bit about innovations in sustainable logistics. I'm pleased that you've joined us today. I'm head of sustainability for Prologis, the world's largest industrial logistics real estate provider, and really excited about a dynamic panel and discussion that we have to share with you today. So a bit while we're here, we really want to discuss how we collectively can define this future state of sustainable logistics. You know, it's an industry and you've seen just a massive explosion over the last 30 years or so specifically around a global supply chain. And so when you think about how goods and services are moved around the world and across different networks, figuring out the future of how we do that sustainably, meaning decarbonized, focus around efficiency, how we drive that. We really want to share with you some emerging best practices as it relates to how we can advance those sustainable initiatives within your own value chain as well as we move towards some pretty aggressive targets that we have set forth in 2040 and 2050. So I'm pleased to be joined by my co-presenters here, Julia Raish with Amazon. She is their global lead for sustainable buildings. Mike Mahana is the Global Sustainability Director for Yusen Logistics. Unfortunately, Jennifer Silberman won't be able to join us today. She's come under the weather, getting a bit of that winter bug that's been going around, but doing some amazing things over at Dollar Tree stores. So we'll grab Jennifer at some point and bring her back on to a future webinar, and then myself heading up sustainability for Prologis. So again, really pleased that you're joining us today. What I thought I'd do is set the stage a little bit on the topic, and then we'll hear a bit more in depth from Julia and Mike around what they're doing with their respective organizations on the topic around sustainable supply chains. So a bit of housekeeping. We will have time towards the end of the webinar to take your questions. So please put those into the Q&A in the chat that's available on the platform here. And just so that you're aware, the session will be recorded and distributed after the event. The last piece is I'd like to just talk a little bit about Chatham House rules. So feel free to share what was said, but not who said it. Essentially, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this is a value-added conversation and keep to the appropriate confidentiality and proprietary nature of some of the discussion. So thank you for adhering to that. So as you've probably seen, I mean, I'm sitting here in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's going to be 66 degrees today on February 21st of 2024. We're at an inflection point. When you think about the transition, not only from an energy standpoint, but the need for climate action as it relates to just the change that we're seeing afoot, really fortifying and making resilient the future of our supply chain is going to be really important for really the future of how we operate as mankind. And we saw a lot of this during the pandemic, right? You know, the supply chain issues that we saw and really recognized, and I think it kicked a bit into hyperspeed, the need to really fortifying a reliable supply chain. So whether that's serving it through clean energy, driving energy efficiency, just being good stewards as it relates to energy consumption and usage is something that's really critical for all global organizations. You know, here at Prologis, we set, it really prompted us to set a target to go net zero for our value chain by 2040. So when I say value chain, that's not only our own operations of what we do in our offices and spaces, but as many of you thankfully lease space from us to conduct your supply chain and logistics business, it's also around provisioning of renewable energy and other sorts of things as you leverage our spaces to really drive delivery of your goods and services. So thinking through how do we create the future of sustainable logistics is something near and dear to what we're doing as an organization, and look forward to sharing a bit more of that with you. And so it's not only what it takes from a voluntary effort or from customer feedback, but there's a lot of regulatory impacts that are on the rise and increasing around climate action. So in the United States, you can see a handful of the various things at a federal or a state level that are driving initiatives around sustainable supply chain, whether it's in an enterprise level, disclosing your climate action from the SEC, to the incentives available through the Inflation Reduction Act for solar, EV charging, and the like, as well as then specific state-based initiatives, whether in New York or California, around carbon disclosure, or even required benchmarking that has fines if you don't benchmark, around energy efficiency and auditing for more efficiency in states like New York. Europe, and even globally, much of the same, whether it's disclosure laws, the energy performance building directives around how you're operating within a facility within certain efficiency. There's renewable energy requirements where any facility over 500 square meters by 2027 will be required to have solar, and then a whole package in Fit for 55 and various things around incentives to drive behaviors around more sustainable buildings and transportation. And on top of that, on the next slide, are other just various trends happening within the supply chain, whether it's around funding and money going into renewable energy investment, the electrification of transportation and what's going on there, whether it's your own passenger vehicle EV, all the way up to heavy duty truck transport, just a variety of things going there. Sustainable supply chain and procurement, thinking about down your value chain. How are you thinking about what are your suppliers doing? How sustainable are they being in terms of their behavior in the products and services that you have? Digitization and AI, how's that going to influence how we work smarter, not harder, as it relates to the efficiency of delivering goods and managing the flow of traffic globally? The opportunity to introduce more and more circular economy. We actually work with a tire wholesaler here in the United States that actually leverages its logistics network to take back used tires as they deliver new tires. Via electric vehicle box trucks. And so it's more ideas like that around how do we make supply chains more circular so that we can reintroduce end-of-life materials into that same value chain. And all of that bubbles up to just an increasing number of climate commitments that we have globally, both between corporations, governments, and then, just evolving as it relates to other sorts of things. So some of the things that we're trying to do is think about how do we integrate more sustainable features into the warehouse and building designs that we have. So I talked a little bit about, and kind of I want to sort of compartmentalize this discussion in a couple of different areas. When we think about it, we really think about three primary areas of impact when you think about carbon emissions and just the opportunity to go net zero within this logistics supply chain. First is the built environment. So if you think about the concrete and steel that's used to build warehouses, as well as any building really that's out there, carbon emissions are produced when you think about manufacturing the concrete, manufacturing the steel, and then ultimately the construction of the facilities. So we think a lot about how can we start looking at reducing the embodied carbon, or the carbon that goes into that concrete, the carbon that goes into that steel, in the way that we build new facilities. Second, we think about when our customers use our facilities, they obviously need to use energy, whether it's the automation of the robotics to pick and pack and sort, all the way to light to heavy manufacturing that sometimes happens in our facilities. Energy consumption is just a byproduct of those activities. And so how can we, as a logistics provider, provide clean energy to those facilities? How do we look at things like on-site solar, battery storage, sustainable building design, energy efficiency, and those sorts of things, so that as we serve those needs, we do so in a cleaner and cleaner way. And then the third piece is then, as those trucks are loaded or as they come in, how do we electrify those fleets? How do we in the future look at other alternative methods of transportation, whether it's green hydrogen or otherwise, so that we really leverage the strategic positioning of the logistics network and the warehouses and distribution centers to, while the trucks are being loaded, electrify those trucks through EV charging and fleet electrification to enable, whether it's last mile delivery or even further over the road dock to dock sort of transitions. Lower that footprint of how those trucks are going to essentially deliver those end packages or equipment to end consumers. So we continue to think about how do we integrate these features as part of new building design as well as part of our retrofits in contribution to our net zero strategy by 2040. And so ultimately, where we're headed as a global supply chain is creating this interconnected network for the sustainable movement of goods. So when you think about whether it's an Amazon package showing up at your house, whether it's you heading over to a Dollar Tree stores as a retailer, and then how Mike and the Yusen team is getting those goods to the proper location, it's all around how do we think about the evolution towards that sustainable movement of those goods, lowering carbon emissions, driving efficiency, using digitization and technology to get those goods there faster, better, cheaper, cleaner, et cetera. So we're really focused around that, around how to evolve and increase that network as we move into the next 15, 20 years, where we've got some pretty significant needs on the horizon around reducing emissions and driving a better way for us to deliver on those. So really excited to work with, to talk with this group and get into some of the meat of those issues as part of this webinar and discussion. So I'm going to transition it to Julia here in a moment, but before I do, just remember to log your questions into the chat. Really want this to be as much as we can over a webinar and a chat function. Make this a dialogue between all of us. And I see, hundreds of folks that have joined to partake in this discussion. So really looking forward to it. And with that, Julie, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Thank you again for joining us, and very excited to hear from Amazon and some of the sustainability features and initiatives that you have going.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John, and thanks for inviting me. I think we can dive right into the second slide here and start talking about that. So driven by all the issues that you mentioned and urgency of climate change, Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge in 2019. And through that is committed to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040 in all of our global operations. So what that means is that, one, we're committed to measuring and reporting our greenhouse gas emissions on a regular basis. And Amazon reports our global emissions publicly every year, and they are available on our website, should folks be curious, and in our annual sustainability report. And then the second important commitment of the pledge is to implement decarbonization strategies through what we call real business change and innovations. So includes many of the things you mentioned, John, but efficiency improvements, renewable energy, lower carbon materials, and other emissions elimination strategies. And this is really the most important part, because we're trying to drive real change, not just in our own business operations, but in partnership with the broader industry across buildings and transportation and packaging and products, to really reduce the emissions associated with our direct and indirect footprint. And then lastly, the reality is, with some of the things you mentioned earlier, John, we can go out into the market to ask for low carbon concrete right now, but there are pockets of the industry where there aren't great low carbon solutions at scale, or at least with a acceptable cost parity. And so we're working towards, reporting the emissions, measuring them, managing them, driving them down, but then ultimately there will be some emissions remaining that the Climate Pledge commits to step 3, which is neutralize those remaining emissions with quantifiable, real, permanent, and socially beneficial carbon offsets to achieve that 2040 goal. Next, please. And since 2019, more than 400 companies have joined Amazon in signing the Climate Pledge, which is an achievement we're really excited and proud about, because we believe that addressing these issues is we're going to be most successful going together collectively. This isn't just about Amazon or the other co-founders, but this is really a collective movement, and we need everybody engaged. And so all these 400 plus companies that represent a broad swath of industries across transportation, retail, manufacturing, food, textiles, you name it, and dozens of countries. All of these companies are collectively committed to reach net zero carbon emissions in their business operations as well by 2040, including Prologis. So thanks, John. And along with the climate pledge, Amazon launched a $2 billion climate pledge fund, which is dedicated to support the development of sustainable technologies, particularly those low carbon, socially beneficial and emerging technologies that help us all address the climate crisis. And next, please. So this is, how are we going to get there? Amazon is a large company and a global footprint. It touches multiple sectors. So it's quite a complicated process. And I'll be honest, we don't have everything figured out, but we are rolling up our sleeves and doing the hard work to do as much as we can across our entire network. So this is a little bit about how we plan to reach net zero carbon emissions in the next 16 years. We've identified some core focus areas. We've set interim goals and targets, and then we've identified kind of those short and long-term key areas of our business that we really want to double down on decarbonization, including the different levers and accelerators to help us get there. So as the building lead for Amazon in our sustainability organization, I'm obviously largely focused on building construction, design, and operations, but we're also, of course, addressing our logistics network, our transportation network, our servers and hardware in our data centers and packaging. We're engaging in the industry to create partnerships to drive change. We do a lot of great collaboration with Prologis in our logistics network in order to do that. And then engaging our whole entire value and supply chain. This is not something that any company can do on their own, and it's really critical to work with partners to help find those alternatives and drive those emissions down. Next, please. So just a quick snapshot of kind of the areas represented of what I just mentioned, but investing in renewable energy. We are the largest global procure renewable energy in the world. We've been investing in electrifying our transportation fleet, again, deploying a ton of on-site renewable energy in our logistics network across the globe, and many other kind of facets of our whole value chain. And next. And I'm not going to talk in detail with these other focus areas, but just in case people don't always know, we are doing quite a lot. The Climate Pledge drives a lot of our work in various sectors. So we have very large successful programs in reducing waste and packaging. We've seen a large reduction in packaging waste since 2017. Working to invest in global rainforest protection to protect natural resources. We have a very large social responsibility team that's working on advancing human rights. And of course, we're always looking to for new innovations in our various products and services as well. And next. But as the buildings person and here with our partners here, just thought I would talk a little bit more about kind of just doubling in on what we're doing specifically with our buildings. So bringing the Climate Pledge into our global real estate portfolio, we operate thousands of facilities that serve our employees, our customers, and communities around the globe. So this includes all of our operations buildings, fulfillment centers, delivery stations, warehouses, sort centers, but also our entire corporate office portfolio, our data centers, and our variety of physical retail stores. So we have a complex network of buildings, and we are working to reduce emissions across this entire portfolio through these kind of core ways. We're working to make our buildings all electric and remove fossil fuels wherever we can, especially for the major building systems, while we address those pockets where it's a little harder to do that right away. We're working to make our buildings as energy as efficient as possible. So combined with that electrification, then we can also power the portfolio with renewable energy through a combination of on-site and large utility scale off-site procurement. We're also looking for low carbon building materials, trying to have all of that low carbon concrete and steel, but also find ways to be just more efficient in our design and even use alternative materials. We also are looking to, especially in our grocery chain and refrigerated warehouse logistics chain, looking to deploy low carbon refrigerants and shift the industry in that way as well. And then all of our buildings are and will be powered by renewable energy. And of course, like good practice, we have an enterprise building management system where we meter and track the performance of our buildings so we can fine tune over time, and also find those areas where we need to keep pushing harder to reduce emissions. Next. And just a couple examples, especially in our logistics network, we did launch our first low carbon building operations in the operations network, which is called a same day fulfillment center. It's in Sacramento, California. It's a smaller type of logistics building, but it's called same day because it's one of the places where if you order on Amazon, you get your packages faster. And it is also zero carbon certified, which means we use a third party verification and validation system to prove our low carbon claims. And this building was continuously monitored for a year to achieve that certification, which is done through the International Living Future Institute. And what I really like about this project, while we have a lot of great features associated with HQ2, which is talked about publicly, and people may be familiar with the Spheres in Seattle, or some of the work we did with our partners at Climate Pledge Arena, also in Seattle. This is a really great example of how you can design, construct, and operate a much lower carbon building while keeping all of your other business operations the same. So we're using the same conveyance materials to move packaging, but it's at least 20% more energy efficient. We still have concrete on the floor, but it's low carbon concrete. And so it doesn't disrupt any customer obligations, package movement, or typical operations in the logistics network, but does drastically reduce carbon. And if we go to next, please. Similar example in our grocery footprint, where we launched our first low carbon grocery store in Seattle, which was an Amazon Fresh grocer. And same thing. We added some doors on cases and trialed some lower carbon refrigerants to bring those emissions down. Also have low carbon concrete, and highly energy efficient. So it's the same, gives us the same customer experience when you go shopping there, same functionality, same operations, but is a demonstration that with little thought and planning, you can achieve low carbon buildings, given your current operations. And we're taking learnings from these two pilots that have launched, and we have a couple others as well that we won't talk about today, and scaling that throughout the portfolio. So these are also a great way to dip in, to try it, to work with your supply chain, work with your partners and your developers and all your team, get comfortable with it, and then scale it back into that portfolio. So pause there and turn it back over.
Julia, that's wonderful. It's just nice to see I'll call it the taking the ownership, the responsibility, and the innovation to drive so many just amazing things to decarbonize the portfolio. And I think one of the key things that you highlighted towards the end there is it's just a constant learning process because, Prologis and Yusen, we'll get to you in a second, Mike, I know are doing many similar sorts of things, whether we actually just had our first net zero ILFI building over in Eindhoven, the Netherlands. And it's just around how do we learn? How do we learn from those things? How do we pilot and then scale? Where this is not an overnight change, right? This is going to be topical issues that we've just got to drive for the next 20 years. So that leadership is great to see from the Amazon team. Mike, I know you're a little bit earlier on, right, in your journey, and I think that relates to, and I see some of the questions coming in already, and it's sort of saying, hey, we're a little bit earlier on in our journey. How do we get started and some of those things? So I'd love to welcome you to share a little bit about Yusen, what you guys do, and then where you're kind of at on that journey, being, I think, roughly a year or so into the role, if I recall correctly.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today. And you're right, we're a little earlier on in our journey, so I'll have a bit of a briefer introduction of myself and my company here. So Yusen Logistics is one of those companies that most people have never heard of, but we've actually probably touched many of the things or moved many of the things that people interact with on a daily basis. We're a global supply chain leader offering a full suite of 3PL logistics services, including ocean and air freight forwarding, customs brokerage, warehousing, distribution, and supply chain management. We have approximately 26,000 employees around the world, scattered across 681 operations in 47 countries, and we have a footprint of approximately 31 million square feet of warehousing. So not quite the scale of Prologis, but I'm going to go ahead and say that's a pretty good size. I've been at Yusen since last year. For quite some time, we've been doing a number of sustainability initiatives, but it really kicked into high gear last year when we publicly announced our interim Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas goals on the road to our 2050 net zero goal. So coming up quickly, we're looking to reduce our emissions 15% by 2026 and 45% by 2030. Some of the things we've been looking at, first on our list, have a lot to do with our built environment. Obviously, we're doing a lot to address general energy efficiency in our buildings where we can. We have some solar installations already in place, up and running. And next month, we have 2 installations coming online in California, which should be putting out approximately 1.7 megawatt hours of electricity. So really looking forward to adding that to our portfolio. We've done a lot to transition our fleet of forklifts from propane over to electric. That's been going on for some time now, but the speed of that has been increasing steadily. And one of the areas that we see that we can make a big improvement is for our yard trucks, which move the tractors around between the bays at our warehouses. For the most part, those are running on diesel. We do have a few electric forklifts in place, and where we can, we are using renewable diesel, primarily in California, which is doing good work there. But in the long term, we are looking to switch those over to be electric yard trucks. But still, that does have a direct link to our built environment, because we really have to make sure we have the electric infrastructure in place to handle that load and that demand.
That's fantastic, Mike, and impressive to see. I know that we just inked a build to suit for a property in Germany that'll be all electric warehouse. So using heat pumps as well, including some of that forklift charging and things. So it's a journey, right? It's not a sprint as we talk about sort of this issue. And I was kind of curious, Mike, when, given that it's early on, to what extent are you getting questions from your customers around this whole topic, right? How can we more sustainably deliver? What are you doing as a 3PL? That sort of thing. What sort of questions, if any, are you fielding from customers at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking overall at sustainability across industries, a lot of times it starts with more public facing or larger brand names where they're going to be making goals first and making moves first when they're dealing more directly with the consumer. But it has definitely come to us, and it's welcome attention that we're getting. And for sure, it has expanded the conversations we're having with our customers. More and more, we're starting to see that sustainability is something that we are graded on RFPs. And then likewise, the percentage or its value has been increasing on those RFPs. About a year or so ago, we did lose one RFP because we did not score well on sustainability. And that was really a wake-up call for us. We got a lot of people's attention. I should say, I don't think the score that we got was quite accurate, but it was a lesson for us that we need to be better in communicating our performance. Because I think it was just a lack of understanding of some of the efforts that we have underway. Overall, it's right now the conversations that we're having with our customers, it's really about awareness. For the most part, when we engage with a client, they want us to get goods from point A to point B at a low cost and on time, but may not be aware of all the different stops or different hands that touch goods along that route. So really, it's trying to do some education to help customers understand the different steps along the way, and understanding where their options are to make a difference. We've also, in those conversations, been expanding who we talk to, right? For the most part, we may historically just been talking to someone who has a title related to logistics or procurement or something like that. But now we are having more conversations with people with sustainability or ESG in their title. And so it's been great for us to understand really what our customers' goals are, expand it, and realize where we have common areas that we can work on.
Yeah, that's it's familiar to Prologis as well, right? The whole aspect of um, engaging with our real estate, title partners, but also then expanding that conversation into sustainability to really understand those customer needs, learn from that in terms of what we can do. It sounds like you've got a very similar approach that's been beneficial to you. And sorry you lost that business, but at the same time, sometimes those wake up calls are good, right? To magnify the importance of the issue. There's great questions coming in from the audience, so I'm actually going to transition to those here in a moment. But before I do, I just do want to give a shout out to the Climate Pledge and Julia, some of that work, as you mentioned, Prologis is a member, and I think and it's not just the commitment, but the value that we get out of those partnerships where we've met through that vehicle a number of startups and other sorts of technology opportunities that really help advance some of these initiatives that move forward. So anyone in the audience, urge you to go check out the Climate Pledge, and a lot of good useful tools as part of that. So kind of in that same vein, Julia, are there any key partnerships, standards, certifications just around the built environment or technologies that you see that would be important to maybe share with this audience as they start thinking about their own kind of view of the built environment and what can be done? Any advice there?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is maybe a tag on what Mike was saying earlier. Is just communicating with your partners and with your supply chain about what you need. We appreciate it when our supply chain pushes on us, if they know about the climate pledge and they know about our goals, but maybe we're not communicating that explicitly on an individual project. They may ask about that, and that's really great. So I think the communication has to go both ways, as well as kind of us communicating directly with our partners about what we need. We have our own internal sustainable building standard that we created that all of our teams at Amazon that have real estate portfolios are implementing in their own business lines. And from a carbon perspective, right now it best aligns with the International Living Future Institute's zero carbon certification. And for many of our projects, we use that process to do that quality control on our carbon reduction. And then for a portion of those, we will actually pursue the certification, which does require that annual monitoring performance that I mentioned. We're also engaged with several other partners in the industry that are helping solve some of those newer decarbonization topics. And John, you mentioned those earlier, particularly around embodied carbon emissions. So we've got a couple partners that work with us there that help us both track and report those emissions on our individual building projects, but also are driving broader industry change. So I think just finding the area that's most important to a particular company and what those focus areas and targets are, you're working backwards from your goals, and then finding those right industry partners that align with that and to help you in that journey is sort of what I would say.
That's great. And a connected question to that as it relates to the technologies, there's substitute materials for concrete have come up more and more in thinking about what role might those play in lowering embodied carbon. So things like mass timber or otherwise. Curious if you have any experience or views on that, Julia, as it relates to just innovation and different type of sustainable materials for buildings.
Yeah, definitely. As part of our sustainable buildings program, one of our core focus areas is on new technology innovation. So we want to use our own built environment as that testing ground to look around corners, identify those most hard to abate areas of a building, and then find some partners or actual technology that then we could bring in to test in an operational environment. That helps us, one, sort of create that longer term runway where there isn't an immediate solution yet. But it also kind of helps in that medium term where the solution may exist on the market, but possibly not at the scale that we would need to procure, and is quite novel. So we would want to test it either in one of our operating environments, be it data center, or grocery, or operations first before scaling it. And then specific to embodied carbon materials, yeah, we've been using low carbon steel and concrete in many of our facilities and have been asking that of the market. The response is variable, of course, because it is such a highly regional material, and is still pretty new. And then our HQ2 in DC does use quite a bit of mass timber, as do a few of our other offices, and we've been exploring the use of alternative materials, like bio-based materials in other parts of our portfolio as well. But with everything, also want to make sure that, we're being responsible if we make that switch. So we want to make sure any timber we do use is sustainably sourced if we're going to switch that out for the low carbon concrete and steel, or do it all together for sort of a nice combination.
Yeah, exactly. And I encourage the audience to go to jump online and search for Amazon HQ2, and you can read about some really neat features that are part of that facility. Kind of transitioning to that operational efficiency component, Mike. I'll direct this question kind of your way. Data is critical for understanding what that footprint looks like, where the opportunities are, et cetera. And so curious from your point of view, how are you thinking about that at Yusen around, just using data and leveraging data to drive sustainability within the operations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the trend overall for all of us is more data everywhere and greater transparency. Our industry for a long time has been a bit opaque, and I don't think that has been on purpose. It's just been, for the most part, because people haven't necessarily been that interested in it. But we are definitely gathering information from all of our transport partners. So at Yusen Logistics, we don't own any of the planes or ocean freighters we have. Those are all our service providers, as well as most of the over the road trucks as well, and of course railroads. So we're working with all those different partners to gather the data to really understand what our scope 3 footprint is, and then to be able to divide that up. This is something that we don't have ready to roll out yet, but that we're working on to understand how we can determine each customer's amount of emissions for each of those steps along the way. So it's a continuing process. It's something that we're developing maturity in, and I know it's just going to keep on growing from here.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, and I think a lot of us are in that same position. For us at Prologis, one of the things that we desire the energy data of our customers that are using our facilities, not only for purposes of sustainability reporting and ESG, but it allows us to then do a lot more analysis and analytics around where opportunities may sit and may exist within our properties. So I agree with you that data is critical to really thinking through that. And so I'll transition into questions from the sort of the audience here, and maybe the first one, Julia, for you, and it's kind of around this aspect that when we build new, we can build from scratch. But when we retrofit or think about existing facilities, there are only certain things that you can do from a retrofit standpoint, whether thinking about energy efficiency, readiness for clean energy, integrating EV charging and things like that. So how is, and Prologis certainly faces this as well in thinking about when we think about re-roofing a property or what have you, trying to re-roof that for a 30-year life so that we can ultimately put solar on at some point. How's Amazon thinking about sort of the retrofit piece of the program in addition to the new buildings?
Yeah, our portfolio is so large and varied that we do have a lot of both. So, for example, in our physical retail and our worldwide grocery stores, there is a lot of going into existing buildings, whereas there is probably more net new building in our logistics, just because we do have a particular way that we need the facility to operate, and is also often driven by where is the greatest customer demand we're trying to fill. So sometimes we're moving into a market where, from a carbon emission standpoint, we do know it can be better sometimes to go into an existing building, so you're not building an entire new shell, which is where all your embodied emissions come from. But sometimes the configuration of that space, be it column sizing or bay sizing, may not work for our internal operations. So I guess I don't really have a great answer, except that it's just it's varied. And we try to make the most sustainable real estate decision upstream first that we can. And if we do go into an existing building and probably largely going to pour a new concrete floor, and so there's still an opportunity to have that be lower carbon concrete. And then we do a fair amount of retrofits and upgrading in our buildings, whether we've been in them for a while or we're moving into an existing one, in particular to the HVAC and the lighting systems. And so those are opportunities to possibly work with the landlord or the owner of that building to switch to all electric if you're going to make that retrofit investment or not. And then I think another thing that sometimes gets forgotten, but there's certain contract and leases, so various mechanisms that you can use to also work with that property owner to figure out the right way to, let's say, deploy on-site solar if you don't own the building or it's got an existing roof but can handle it. So I think there's the actual implementation in the building, but there's also some process steps that can be done to achieve the goals as best possible.
Makes a ton of sense, and obviously we've been engaged in those those sorts of conversations for a number of years, being kind of Prologis as the building owner. And this actually that segues nicely to a question that around, does Prologis offer a program around solar for tenants? And we do. We've enjoyed the fruits of that program for a number of years now. Where what we're trying to do from Prologis is we've got a goal to get to 1 gigawatt of solar supported with storage energy by 2025. So we've got a little over a year and a half to get that done. Fortunately, we're more than halfway there, but we've got some really aggressive programs to try and enable providing clean energy to our customers. A lot of times that's going to be market dependent. So many markets are much more friendly to solar energy, both in terms of incentives, but even just naturally how the energy markets and the electricity price operates to enable that. So whether it's Mexico, California, New Jersey, into Germany, and Japan, China, areas around the world, we've got very active solar programs to try and do it. And, that helps support goals like yours, Julie, around, the mass amount of renewable and clean energy that Amazon's procuring is just amazing. I've been in that space for a number of years, and I remember Jeff Bezos cracking a champagne bottle on top of a wind turbine a number of years ago. And I think that just, since then has just continued to propel sort of the industry really at large. So there's another question. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, we just appreciated that partnership. It's sometimes people aren't always sure of or aware of, how would you deploy solar on a roof when you're not the owner of the building. So having an owner of the building and a landlord when you're the tenant that is amenable to that and works with you through the lease term, so that both parties are benefiting from that setup, it is really critical. And that's where I think just those talking to your partners and getting out there and having those conversations and figuring out those agreements is very mutually beneficial.
I agree. And that's where, Mike, to your earlier point around it's having the conversations, right, with the customers, maybe that has a sustainability in the title, or even when they don't, really just proactively bringing up these conversations, will help advance a bit how we think about that. Transitioning, maybe the last piece, I know we're close to it time. Um, we haven't talked as much about it, but one of the other pieces is just enabling the future of transporting those goods. So through electrifying vehicles, whether it's everything from an employee's passenger car as they pull up to work in the warehouse, to last mile delivery, to class 8, large semi truck deliveries where electrification isn't quite the solution yet to really go over the road. My curious around, just what do you see on the horizon as it relates to logistics and transportation and those pieces when you think about clean technologies for over the road, or you mentioned maritime or aviation when you think about sustainable aviation fuel and otherwise. What are you kind of seeing on the horizon? And then I'll maybe flip that same question to Julia after you're done, Mike.
Yeah, so for on our side, we are looking at our options for providing recharging stations for some of our trucking providers that regularly visit our facilities. And I think one of the things that's happening all over the place is just trying to understand where those high usage areas are going to be and understanding how flows may change over time. Because anywhere we're going to invest in putting in a charging station, we need to know that that's where the truck traffic is going to be for some number of years in the future. I think there's also, as you mentioned, a good bit of thinking about, really what is the appropriate technology, whether it's electric for shorter distance or hydrogen for longer distance, but they each have their own challenges as far as building out the infrastructure goes.
Yeah, and I would say very similar lines of how we're thinking at Prologis. We've actually been fortunate to electrify a number of Class 8 semi-truck routes, but those are mostly drayage operations where they're going from a port to a warehouse back to that port. And so the distance, is friendly to EV. When you think about then doing cross-dock operations where then trucks go over the road for hundreds of miles, EV isn't quite there. So kind of thinking about what are the longer term as well as the shorter term. And that's also one of the things that we think about a lot is, to justify the investment, in that EV infrastructure, you need to have some guarantee of utilization, right, of that equipment. And all of that goes into some of these early on decision making around where and what to sort of electrify. Julia,
Yeah,
obviously,
Julie,
oh, go, sorry. Sorry, Mike.
I was just going to say, continuing on our comment earlier about it changing and expanding the conversations you have with your clients, for us, it really requires us to know that our customers are committed to certain goals and that they're going to be working with us for a certain number of years. Historically, we've moved facilities pretty regularly. We lease most of our facilities and we move them pretty regularly based on client needs on where they're located. But as we do these investments, we're really going to need to know that our customers are in it with us.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Um, and Julia, I mentioned earlier I think that I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky at 65 degrees, but last week I saw a beautiful Amazon delivery truck pull up that was electric. So obviously Amazon's doing a ton of things around this topic as well. Just curious to get some of your insights or perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we have a commitment to have 100,000 electric delivery vans on the road by 2030. And doing that in partnership in the US with Rivian, and then also another partner in the EU, which enabled us to, we're moving along towards that goal. And in 2022, we had over 140 million packages delivered by electric vans across Europe and the US. So really excited to see more and more of those come to different markets. as well. But like you mentioned, it's a complex transportation network. For us to get our products from manufacturers and sellers to customers around the globe is pretty complicated. Our logistics network spans every step of the journey, from the transportation between factories and ports to last mile delivery between those delivery station buildings and customers. So a couple other ways that we're working to decarbonize, we're trying to increase our fleet efficiency, expanding the use of low carbon fuels. So that's for all vehicle types, and also sustainable aviation fuels. Scaling electric and alternative fuel vehicles, like I just mentioned. But we also partner in initiatives to reduce carbon emissions in the wider transportation industry. So just generally, that's where those partnerships, again, are really, really helpful. And we're engaging with policymakers and other decision makers to advance policies in support of broader transportation decarbonization, particularly in some of those harder to abate zones, such as ocean freight. So we touch a lot of the transportation network, and I think some of it has some ready-made solutions now, but others are going to take that longer term view and the hard work between all of our companies to dig in there to address those sectors.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point when you think about just what it takes a village, as the saying goes, right? And so I think the collaboration of this sort of dialogue, just continuing to increase, will help solve it. One last question. I'll take the first stab at answering that, and then I'll flip it to you all for any closing comments. It's a great question. What role does flexibility, demand side response, battery storage, et cetera, play in logistics, energy, and decarbonization strategy? And I think flexibility is the strategy, right? When we think about the integration of whether it's vehicles charging at a facility, whether it's clean energy coming from a grid or a distributed energy resource on a rooftop, to battery storage, even to the point where this concept of, instead of being a consumer of energy, you're a prosumer of energy, where you're also actively integrated with the grid to not only receive energy, but provide clean energy back to the grid and things. Flexibility is really at the core to it. So one of the areas that, from a Prologis standpoint, that we're really looking heavy into is not only what we're doing behind the meter, meaning the solar that we provide to customers, the battery storage to move those electrons to times of the day to kind of flatten that load and reduce real-time carbon emissions as well. It's also how to participate in front of the meter. So we're doing a lot around community solar, thinking about operating resource adequacy markets, where it helps to kind of stabilize the grid in a number of the urban areas that we operate. So we see a huge impact of flexibility as a key as it relates to managing those operations. So whether on that topic or otherwise, I just offer maybe Julia and then Mike any feedback or closing comments that you'd have for the group today.
I'll just start by saying that the specific topic you just brought up there, I'll admit I'm not an expert in. We have various teams at Amazon that are working on everything from the grid connectivity to the electrical infrastructure that needs to be integrated on site, to piloting perhaps some energy storage systems to test out. It's quite complicated. If you picture in one of Amazon's logistics buildings, it might have electric vans charging on it. Might even have electric cargo bikes. It might have solar on the roof. It could be an all-electric building. So how does all of that get integrated and managed? It is complicated, and I don't think we have it figured out yet, but we're working on that. But I think that's a good example of kind of my closing note would be that we don't have this all figured out, and I think we're all working on it, and it really does take a village, and that's why we're so excited to see so many signatories to the climate pledge, because these industries and their various sectors really need to work together to solve these problems. We want to give back to the broader industry as much as we can when we learn and when we create new partnerships that drive broader change that others can tap into, because it not just helps us, but it helps everybody. And I think if we all can start solving some of these collectively, then it makes all of our lives easier in our day-to-day jobs.
Absolutely. Well said. Mike, and maybe take us home from your perspective.
Sure, absolutely. Flexibility is the name of the game. Whether there's a storm or some other event happening in the world, when people need their goods moved and delivered, you have to be flexible, adaptable, and able to make it happen. And the flip side of that card is really reliability, which goes hand in hand with it. So anytime we're making improvements or switching to electric, whatever it may be, we need to make sure that we have the systems in place so that if there is an event, we are not going to be out of service for hours or days, whatever the case may be. And as you both said, it really comes down to working with your partners. And when we're talking about the grid across the US, we're relying on our partners to help us understand how the different utility providers work across the country, the different regulations, the different incentives to understand where we can best where we can best place our money in the near term, and then understand what it's going to take to really clean things up in the long run.
Yeah, well said, well put. And I think really, really strong perspectives to share. I want to thank both of you. Thank you, Julia with Amazon and Mike with Yusen Logistics, in joining us today and the Prologis team. Again, sorry, Jennifer from Dollar Tree wasn't able to join us, but hope she's feeling better. So thank you also to those that participated today. As mentioned, this information will be available on demand, as well as keep an eye out for future pieces like this from Prologis as we continue that conversation to not only drive awareness, but drive collaboration as it relates to these pieces. And don't hesitate to reach out to us with any follow-up questions. In fact, we had so many audience questions that we weren't able to get to today. It actually gave us great insight into what's on your mind and things that we can cover on into the future as it relates to similar dialogues like this. So, Julia, Mike, thanks again, and thank you to everyone that participated today, and have a great day.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.